What's up? It's Marco, Sage of Soccer, and today we'll be talking about the US manager Jesse Marsch and the recent news about him. He was recently approached to be the manager of Leicester City, who are in the relegation zone of the Premier League, and had just fired their manager Brendan Rodgers. But Marsch turned this job down, and I think that is very interesting, and it might have some implications for the US men's national team. It is very interesting that Marsh turned down this job because not only is this turning down a Premier League job, this is the second time a job has failed to materialize for him. Because he was in talks with Southampton before that talk broke down, and now it's happening again with Leicester. And you have to imagine a manager in deep conversations with multiple Premier League jobs. If he's turning them down, there might be something available. And Marsh is one of, if not the best American manager right now, and there's a vacancy for that US job. So you have to wonder if he's possibly in talks with the US over that US men's national team manager position, and if that is the reason why he's turning down these Premier League jobs. However, that is far from the only possibility. Leicester and Southampton are both in relegation battles, and March was just in one with Leeds, and you might wonder if he just doesn't like being in relegation battles, and if he does end up getting relegated, that could do a lot of damage to his reputation. He may want to avoid that. In addition, there is some complications about how much money Leicester would be spending if they get relegated, so staying away from those jobs might be something that he would do anyway, or maybe he has a job lined up somewhere else that he is thinking about as opposed to just going to the US. But I think that if he did just turn down those jobs, I have to assume something is lined up because that Leicester job, like just on paper, it looks really good. Looking at this Leicester team, it is one of the most talented teams to get relegated from the Premier League if they end up going down. Now, it is hard to say who ends up staying. I mean, I have to assume they'll end up selling James Madison, probably Castagno, Ricardo Pereira, Faiz. Maybe they end up leaving as well. And then Yuri Tielemans is out of contract, same with Soyuncu. They probably walk, but even if you assume they are leaving, and that is a pretty big assumption for some of those players, it is still an insanely talented team for a championship side. When you look at their full squad, things look pretty good. You could have Danny Ward in goal. Obviously, he hasn't cut as a Premier League goalkeeper, but I think he'd be good in the championship, especially if he gets a consistent run of playing time. And he's already helped Huddersfield get promoted before, so I think he could do that again. Then at center back, Sutar, he's a solid player at this level. I think Amarty would do very well in the championship. At fullback, you have got Luke Thomas. I think he could do well. I think that James Justin, whichever side you put him on, like he's going to be a good player. And then you have Christensen, who they just signed. Like that's a pretty good back line. I think that's a strong defense capable of going right back to the Premier League. Ndidi could still be there as well, which is kind of unfortunate because I thought that he had a ton of potential, but he'll probably stay in the championship with them, and I think that he could do very well at that level. Then you still have Dewsbury Hall and Sumari, who I think could be very good players. Maybe Dewsbury Hall can really start to break out and show his stuff, and you have Chowdhury returning from loan too. Then as a winger, maybe Harvey Barnes will end up staying. I mean, he could easily leave, but it's going to cost a lot, and I'm not sure if a Premier League team's going to be willing to spend the money on him. And then up top, you've got Daka, you've got Iheanacho, and maybe James Vardy could find his form again in the championship. I mean, I could see very easily all of those players staying with Leicester. You could probably have maybe like a Castagna stay as well. Like it's could be a very good team, and I think there's a very good chance that they bounce straight back up, and that's even before signing players. Because if you add like a really good center back into the mix, somebody creative to replace James Madison, you'd have to get another good winger. All those options should be available, and I think that there's a very good chance Leicester would bounce straight back to the Premier League. And that is if they get relegated. And I have to say, that is a pretty big if. I mean, one win and they're out of the relegation zone. And with talents like James Madison, if you get Yuri Tielemans to buy in, like, there's a very good chance they don't get relegated. And then you would likely have a good amount of money to spend this season. They didn't have much in the previous season, so I'd assume there'd be a pretty big war chest for the manager. And I think that Leicester, just with the clout they have as a team. I mean, they still have players from that title winning side. Like, I think that that would be a great opportunity for any manager. And if you don't have anything available, it would be a dumb decision to turn that down. Now, you could disagree with some of my opinions on Leicester players. I think I tend to overrate Leicester, probably because I underestimated them once before, so decided not to do that again. But I think I've made a pretty good case that it would be a dumb idea to turn down this Leicester City job. And because of that, you have to assume that Marsh has something planned. And the thing that keeps popping back to my head is the US job. So I want to talk a little bit about how we do. I'm not going to go too much in depth. I talked about this a bit before. I think the main issue with Marsh as a manager is that he has one play style that he's really stuck with, his high pressing system that he likes to use to get the best out of his teams. I think that that's something I don't like. I've talked before about how I really like managers to be flexible in a national team setup. But I think with Marsh, you have to remember that he's come through the Red Bull system and Leeds. Like, that's the only places where he's been, and those teams play with that high pressing style. So you can't just say, oh, that's the only style that he can coach because that's the only one he's had an opportunity to showcase. And he could be able to adapt when he's with a new group of players. And even if he isn't, I mean, I kind of want the US to play with a high pressing style. I think that would be our best opportunity to get some upsets on top teams without completely parking the bus. So I think that would be a positive for Jesse Marsch, but he's still not the ideal manager because his top flight experience just isn't that good. I mean, he did well in Austria, but you know, who wouldn't do well with that RB Salzburg team? He was managing Holland, and to be fair, he didn't screw up his development, which I think that's something. But you know, that's still he was going to win the league no matter what with them. And then he didn't do well with RB Leipzig. Pretty bad job there. He was only in relegation battles with Leeds, and they did get out of it, but they really weren't that good. He was never able to turn that team around. So, I just would rather have somebody more experienced. If we're talking about managers associated with Leicester, I think Brendan Rodgers would probably be a better option for us. He has a pretty simple style of play, which I think could translate well to an international game. His teams tend to have like a lot of burnout. I think that'll be less likely to happen like when you're only meeting like once a month, maybe well much less than that. But obviously he's not like my first candidate, but I'm just saying Marsh or Brendan Rodgers. It's probably Brendan Rodgers right now. But and his teams do well in cup runs, I have to say as well. But I think that there's a good amount to say with this. And Marsh is probably my favorite choice if we do stick with an American coach, but I think it would be a mistake to stick with an American coach and to only limit ourselves to that. And yeah, that's really all I have to talk about. Interesting news with Jesse Marsh, and we'll have to keep our ears peeled for something because this is kind of weird that he's turning down the Leicester City job, in my opinion. And yeah, that's all I got to talk about. See you.